At 22:47 local time, the lead F-35I pilot was 90 minutes into Iran on what his mission brief called a standard deep strike profile. 6 stealth fighters, radars cold, navigating on borrowed coordinates from an intelligence aircraft circling over Iraq. Routine, until the radar warning receiver lit up with the one threat classification every pilot in this war prayed they'd never see up close. X-band fire control energy, a Tor-M1, Russia's short-range point defense, or SAM, locked onto him. Think of it as a bouncer sitting in the dark corner of a bar, invisible until you're already inside, and then it's too late to turn around. Iran parks the Tor around anything it cannot afford to lose. 60 seconds earlier, the Tor had been cold and invisible. Something told the operator exactly where to look before the formation arrived. 38 kilometers and closing. The pilot watched the range count tick down on his display and ran the math he'd hoped he wouldn't need tonight. The Tor's 9M331 missile covers 12 kilometers in roughly 15 seconds, pulling 28 Gs in the terminal phase, 3 times what his jet can sustain in any evasive turn. His bomb run on Parchin required closing to within 15 kilometers to put a GBU-31 JDAM, joint direct attack munition, on a viable trajectory. 3 kilometers separated his weapons release from the Tor's engagement envelope. At 9 miles a minute, that's about 20 seconds of breathing room, and he was burning through it fast. Inside the Tor vehicle, the IRGC operator tracked the contacts, drifting down his scope toward the complex. 32 kilometers now. He'd spent 7 days watching coalition HARMs, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, gut every long-range SAM in western Iran. Every battery that radiated got wiped out. His Tor survived because he never gave them a beam to ride. At 12 kilometers, a HARM couldn't even reach him before his missile reached the target first. That's the beauty of short range. By the time they know you're shooting, the math is already over. The Ghadir VHF early warning network had fed him bearing data 3 minutes ago. Contacts inbound from the southwest. He armed the first 9M331 and watched the range shrink. 25 kilometers. The pilot's first instinct was the Adir's electronic warfare suite, designed to flood a fire control radar with so much noise it can't see straight. Against a fixed frequency system, it works like spray paint on a security camera. The Tor hops frequencies every pulse. Imagine trying to block someone's phone call, but they're switching to a new phone number every half second. By the time you jam one channel, the Tor's already talking on the next 3. Less power per channel means a clearer return through the noise, and the Tor only needs 15 seconds of messy data because the 28G missile closes the remaining distance on inertial guidance, like a dog that already saw the squirrel. You can close the blinds, but the dog's already off the porch. The pilot couldn't jam his way out. 18 kilometers. The RWR shifted from search to lock. Continuous wave illumination, fire control quality. The Tor operator had him. He broke hard left at 7 Gs, chaff and flare dispense while the Adir concentrated what energy it could on the Tor's last detected frequency. The G-forces shoved his helmet into the headrest and squeezed his vision into a narrow tunnel. 8 seconds of sustained loading cost him 8,000 feet, 22,000 compressed to 16,000, then 14 as the defensive brake drove the flight path earthward. The lock broke and the Tor lost him in the chaff cloud. Alive at 14,000 feet, over a military-industrial complex where the IRGC ground security carried the MiSOG-2 shoulder-fired missiles. The MiSOG-2's dual-band seeker checks 2 infrared wavelengths before it commits, basically the missile checking 2 forms of ID. Your flares might fool one sensor, but the second one catches the lie, like telling your wife you were at the gym when your buddy already texted her you were at the bar. Against modern dual-band seekers, the flare loses that argument more often than any pilot wants to think about. The pilot's only defense against a MANPAD, Man-Portable Air Defense System, was altitude. Stay above the MiSOG-2's 3.5-kilometer ceiling and the missile physically can't reach you. The Tor had just dragged him 2,000 feet below that line. He didn't attempt a second pass. Afterburner, nose skyward, climbing through the MANPAD ceiling back toward the Tor's altitude. The gamble, an operator who just lost lock needs precious seconds to reacquire, and seconds was all the pilot needed. At 20,000 feet, he rolled inverted, pulled the nose toward Parchin, and pickled the GBU-31 in a diving release that held him above 15,000 at separation. outside the Misog-2 envelope at the ragged edge of the Tor's optimal zone. The bomb bay doors gaped open for 8 seconds. 8 seconds where the F-35I's radar cross-section jumped from marble to basketball. Think of it like flicking on a flashlight in a pitch-black forest for 1 second. You turn it off immediately, but every set of eyes within a mile already snapped to your position. Inside the Tor vehicle, the operator was still slewing his antenna through the chaff cloud when his scope bloomed with a return that hadn't existed 2 seconds ago. Massive. Clean. The radar cross-section of something that just ripped its own stealth wide open. His fingers moved before his brain caught up, slapping the track, initiate. Feeding the 9M331 Seeker the freshest data it had seen all day. But a fire control solution against a maneuvering target at this range needs 4 seconds of continuous track, and the return was already shrinking. 3 seconds? 2. The scope went cold. Whatever had opened had closed again, and the Tor's computers were left chasing a ghost with a 4-second-old address. The weapons separated, tail kit deploying, and the bay doors slammed shut. The marble returned. The GBU-31 under the F-35 wing wasn't aimed at the mixing hall Israel hit 9 months ago. That strike destroyed Parchin's planetary mixers, the machines that blend fuel binder and oxidizer into solid rocket propellant. Intelligence estimated 18 months to replace them. Iran did it in 5. Because planetary mixers are commercial equipment you can source through intermediaries and have running before the wreckage cools. The missiles currently arcing toward Israeli cities were built with propellant from machines Israel had already destroyed once. Building 12 wasn't a mixing hall, it was a casting facility. And that's a very different problem. The Adir's EOTS, electro-optical targeting system, a chin-mounted infrared and laser sensor you see here, had confirmed the difference from 40 kilometers. Building 12 radiated roughly 60 degrees Celsius through its roof, the thermal signature of propellant curing inside a casting pit. Think of a casting pit as pouring the foundation of a house and then building the house around it. Except the foundation costs 10 times more than the house and takes 5 times longer to build. You can truck a new mixer in 5 months. You can't truck in a new casting pit. And under coalition air supremacy, with satellites catching every fresh concrete pour within hours, you can't build one either. Israel wasn't coming back to break what it broke last time. It was coming for the thing Iran thought nobody would figure it out mattered more. The GBU-31 punched through Building 12's reinforced roof at terminal velocity. 2,000 pounds of BLU-109 penetrator detonated inside the casting hall. The blast crushed mandrels, shattered a half-cured Kyber Shikan first-stage motor in its cradle, and collapsed the concrete pit inward. 4 months of civil engineering reduced to 4 seconds of demolition. 90 seconds later, the Ra'ams swooped in from Iraqi airspace. Spice 1000 bombs separated on 100-kilometer glide trajectories, electro-optical seekers steering through smoke toward the mixing halls and storage buildings the Adirs had already mapped. The strike walked across Parchin in sequence, casting first, mixing second, cruise missile R&D last. The warhead explosives facility sat 40 meters from the casting buildings, packed with RDX and HMX, military-grade explosive compounds, hit last. As the Parchin formation turned west for the tanker track over Iraq, the trailing Adir's new EW suite caught something that stopped the weapons officer cold. VHF band radar energy, not the X-band or S-band fire control frequencies every pilot had been watching for since day one. The weapons officer pulled the emission log and his stomach dropped. The Ghadir phased array early warning radar, Iran's domestically built system, had been transmitting since before the first bomb hit. VHF wavelengths run 1 to 10 meters, roughly the same size as the aircraft itself. Think of stealth like hiding behind a tree twice your height. Normal radar is like shining a flashlight at a black mirror angled away from you. The beam just disappears into the dark. VHF is like switching to a floodlight so wide it bounces off of everything, regardless of which way the mirror is pointed. You're not invisible anymore. You're just standing in the open, hoping nobody's looking. The Ghadir doesn't guide missiles. It sees things fire control radars cannot, then tells everyone else where to look. Bearing, altitude, formation size, relayed across Iran's surviving communication network while the Adirs were focused on the Tor. 1,200 kilometers northeast, the second strike package was already 40 minutes past the Iranian border, committed on fuel, unable to turn back, heading for the factory that produced most of the missiles hitting Israeli cities. Iran knew something was in the air tonight. The question was whether they knew where it was going. The Shahrud package. 4 Adirs from the 116th Lions of the South, leading 8 Ra'ams loaded with Spice 2000 guided bombs, had crossed the border 90 minutes ago on a heading no Israeli formation had ever flown. Northeast past Tehran, through the Al-Borz foothills, into the high desert of Semnan province. Every previous Roaring Lion strike terminated near the capital. The airspace beyond Tehran had barely been touched by coalition SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses, which meant the formation was flying into gaps nobody had mapped. Shahrud sits 1,700 kilometers from the nearest Israeli airfield, roughly New York to Denver. The Ra'ams' fuel math after their last aerial refueling over Iraq left margins in single-digit percentages. Every minute of deviation from the planned route subtracted directly from the budget for getting home. If the formation hit unexpected resistance and burned 5 extra minutes maneuvering, the math for the return leg stopped working. Those gaps just started transmitting. The lead Adir's electronic warfare suite caught it at 200 kilometers, 3 seconds of S-band phased array energy, then silence. The weapons officer classified the pulse before the second one arrived, SA-65, Iran's domestically built mobile SAM and replacement for the S-300s destroyed during the summer 2025 campaign. Think of it as a speed camera van that moves after every flash. By the time you know where it was, it's already somewhere else. Mounted on an 8x8 chassis with roughly 200-kilometer range, built to be hard to find and harder to suppress. 7 days of silence, and now the whole corridor northeast of Tehran was waking up because the Ghadir's bearing data reached the air defense network through surviving communications the coalition hadn't jammed. 3 seconds wasn't long enough for a harm to lock. The seeker needs continuous radiation to ride back to the antenna. The SA-65 crews had figured out the counter. Pulse for 3 seconds, drive 200 meters in the dark, pulse again from a new position. Harm arrives 90 seconds later at coordinates where a truck used to be. Inside the SA-65, the 3 seconds between transmit and blackout were the longest in the crew's lives. The commander called the bearing, contacts west, formation strength, then switched off the array. The diver floored 30 tons of truck down a mountain road. 200 meters, the commander called stop. The driver locked the brakes and the truck slewed sideways in the dark, dust cloud invisible behind them. Array powered up, 3 seconds of fresh data, then blackout again. And the whole sequence repeated while a harm worth more than a college education streaked toward a patch of empty road they'd left 20 seconds ago. No way to harm the battery, no way to ignore it either, because the SA-65's 3-second snapshot had just accomplished something the Tor at Parchin never managed. It found the Ra'ams. The F-35I's radar cross-section of roughly 0.001 square meters produced nothing useful on the SA-65 scope. But an F-15 hauling external bombs, conformal tanks, and pylons present a cross-section 1,000 times larger, and one pulse at 100 kilometers handed the SA-65 commander a clean track on every Ra'am in the formation. If he went to continuous track and fired, 8 25G missiles would be in the air before the Ra'ams could react. The formation pressed through. Detouring around the 150-kilometer envelope would burn 20 minutes the Ra'ams didn't have. The tankers set 1,000 kilometers behind them, and every drop between here and Shahrud was already in the tanks. The flight lead accepted the SA-65 as a calculated risk. The alternative was turning home with full racks and explaining that Iran's largest missile factory survived because a truck drove 200 meters. Then the DAS, Distributed Aperture System, basically a 360-degree infrared security camera system bolted to a fighter jet, flagged a contact and made the SA-65 feel like a warm-up. Thermal signature at 60 kilometers east, bearing west on intercept heading. No radar emission, no IFF. Identification, friend or foe. Transponder. The DAS classified it in 3 seconds. Fighter profile, MiG-29, originating from Shahid Ahmadinejad Air Base at Mashhad, 400 kilometers east of Shahrud. The Iranian Air Force's major eastern base, untouched by coalition strikes because nobody had flown this deep into Iran until tonight. Inside the MiG-29, the Iranian pilot hunted with his eyes instead of his radar. Radar deliberately cold. 5 days of war had taught surviving IRIAF pilots one rule: emit and you cease to exist. His IRST, with its OLS-29 infrared search and track sensor, swept steady arcs across the western sky, searching for engine heat against cold darkness the way you scan a dark parking lot for your car using only the key fob's blinking light. He could spot anyone running hot, but the moment he lit his own radar, every Israeli fighter within 200 miles would see him first. He was the one of perhaps a dozen operational Fulcrum pilots still flying, launched 20 minutes ago on a vector from ground control. He didn't need to find stealth fighters directly. He needed one of them to do something aggressive, crack a weapons bay, descend with hot engines, and the thermal bloom would tell him where to point the R-73 infrared missiles on his rails. His ground controller had given him a bearing from the SA-65's earlier snapshot. He was closing from the east, between the strike formation and the tanker orbit, between the Ra'ams and home. The Adir flight lead watched the MiG's thermal signature track westward on DOS and weighed an equation with no clean answer. One radar pulse and the MiG ceases to exist. One radar pulse and every SA-65 along the corridor suddenly sees 4 stealth fighters that were invisible 3 seconds ago. The kind of choice where both options are bad, like your wife asking if the dress makes her look fat. There's no right answer, just degrees of wrong. The MiG could threaten one aircraft at a time inside 20 kilometers. An SA-65 with fresh queuing data could put 25G missiles on the entire Ram formation from 100 out. Closing to Python 5 range for a passive IR shot meant pulling an Adir off the Shahrud target formation. That would open up a gap in the sensor coverage, shielding the Ra'ams from the very battery that had already tracked them. He chose silence. Invisible was worth more than one hit. The Adir spread to interpose between the MiG's approach vector and the Ra'ams, presenting frontal aspect, engine exhaust shielded behind the airframe, thermal signature below the IRST detection threshold. The Iranian pilot swept his sensor across the western sky and found nothing at all. 4 stealth fighters tracked every twitch he made on DOS without transmitting a single electron. At 80 kilometers, the lead Adir's EODs resolved Shahrud, and the weapons officer swore under his breath. New buildings behind new blast walls, thermal signatures, casting pits at curing temperature, across a dozen structures where the targeting package expected 8. Iran hadn't just rebuilt after Rising Lion, it had expanded the facility beyond anything the satellite passes captured, adding capacity that exceeded tonight's weapons allocation, more targets than bombs, and every unfired bomb was a casting pit that survived to produce missiles tomorrow. The weapons officer made the call in 2 words: casting only. Every bomb steered toward buildings glowing at curing temperature. The mixers could wait, these couldn't. The weapons officers in the Ra'ams' back seats worked their targeting displays at a speed that would have been reckless in a simulator. 12 aim points to rebuild from scratch, new GPS coordinates for each, secret reference images swapped from the pre-mission package to real-time EOD snapshots the Adirs were feeding through C4I. 4 minutes to release. 8 miles a minute of closure on a target complex that now had 50% more buildings than the mission plan accounted for. Every keystroke was a triage decision. This pit or that one. This thermal signature or the one 200 meters south that might be hotter. A MiG-29 somewhere behind them. An SA-65 that already knew where the Ra'ams were, and fuel gauges that didn't care about any of it. Revised coordinates streamed via C4I to the Ra'ams. The formation pushed to release range with fuel gauges showing numbers that allowed nothing except execution. On board were Spice 2000 guided bombs, 2,000-pound weapons with GPS and scene-matching electro-optical seekers, essentially facial recognition but for buildings. The bomb compares what it sees on the way down to a stored photograph and steers itself to match, separated from pylons and the Ra'ams bank west immediately, toward the tankers, toward home. The seekers locked onto the rooftops at Shahrud, matching real-time energy against Israeli intelligence reference photographs, correcting glide paths in the final seconds before impact. Shahrud's casting infrastructure collapsed inward under its own roofs. The concrete chutes that took months to pour and years to collaborate, the production line that manufactured most of the missiles arcing toward Israeli cities, folded into rubble in under 30 seconds. When satellites passed overhead 48 hours later, nearly every building in the solid motor production lines was a crater. Iran's ballistic missile assembly line didn't just stop, it ceased to exist. If you enjoyed this video, watch our other video about B-2s pounding Iran. Bye for now.